Can you fill a non-WoW player in? Is the Classic Plus just massive community cope, or has Blizzard officially said something? It's not cope. There's he said, she said type. The question is if it's going to be good. It's not an if, it's a question of when and if it's good. The question is implementation and if they stick to a classic ideology. I know Zaryu, yesterday he had like a Classic Plus brainstorming sesh with his chat. And I think it's very important that the team that makes Classic Plus needs to like basically follow the decision-making process that made Classic WoW. And not try to just make things more sensible because it makes more like sense in a modern environment. I think that the problem is that people, they're like, the developers might see something as a problem that's actually intentional. And I think that that's something that is a very high risk with Classic Plus, where like the devs in 2004 intentionally made XYZ class, let's say, weaker in PvE because of their overall impact on the game. If that changes, there's repercussions to that. Maybe it's too strong. Maybe it's like, modern players don't want the cancer 20 years ago. You sure? I think that the problem is people associate old equals cancer. And it's not true. What old MMOs do really, really, really well is make you feel rewarded for your time spent in the game universe. And what happens when you try to get rid of time wastes, you lose maybe some sense of immersion. You lose something with it. If you could teleport anywhere in the world, it diminishes the world. It's convenient, but if you could teleport anywhere, the world is meaningless. They call it friction, right? I think that it's very important to have like these journeys for your characters. I really like to bring up EverQuest. Anytime I talk about this topic, old MMOs wasting your time. And I think a lot of people get it twisted when they think about games. The game is meant to waste your time. Think about it. It's supposed to waste your time. That's what you want when you log into the game. You want your time to be wasted. Otherwise, you would go do something productive with your life. But no, you're going to sit down and level in a video game. Why? Right? Why? So innately, the game is wasting your time. And people feel like when the game wastes your time in different ways, they feel like it's worse, right? But like, EverQuest wastes your time with slow leveling, right? Is that a waste of your time? Or is that part of the game? It's if you look at the game under a certain lens that the game wasn't built around, yes, it's going to waste your time. Yes, it's going to be cancer. Yes, there's going to be things that are annoying, but I think that if a game is wasting your time and you feel like you're wasting your time playing the game, then maybe the game wasn't meant for you, man. Waste of time is a weird argument. You could always extend it to say life itself is a waste of time. I mean, yeah, you could. That's pretty grim, but you could. It's not wasting time if it's your hobby and you enjoy it. I feel like some people complaining about that might just want to find something else. Exactly, that's kind of my point. Is that, like, if you're gonna complain about an old game being, you know, too slow or not modern enough, maybe they should play Fortnite and get instant reward for their time spent. Maybe you should go just like do anything else. You don't have to play classic World of Warcraft for 20 years. I think that it's important to recognize that classic World of Warcraft isn't a game made for Zoomer brain. It isn't instant gratification. And trying to update this old game structure that was made to like immerse you into a game world where you could be rewarded for the time you've spent. That's the whole point of it. And to try to be like, oh, well, we got to modernize this. Yeah, that's not the point. That's not why the game exists. And if you try to make that happen, it's just not going to appeal to anybody. because the Zoomer brains are gonna still play their games, and then the people who wanted like an immersive world and to escape to this like crazy like engaging world aren't gonna play the game anymore either. So who's it made for? The modern design, who is it made for in World of Warcraft? Nobody, man. Progressing your character in an MMO shouldn't feel like a waste of time, even if it technically is. They could absolutely remove a lot of tediousness that ultimately is outdated filler content. AQ gate opening questline. What? That's the craziest take I've ever heard. Saying tediousness that is ultimately outdated filler content and then citing the AQ gate opening quest chain, one of the most epic like raid quest lines in the entire game. What are you playing the game for, bro? Are you just raid simulatoring? Go play Fellowship if that's all you want. Go play World of Warcraft, retail, and Q Mythic Plus if that's all you want, man. Why would you even play WoW if that is outdated filler content? That's the whole game. Okay, let's actually break this down and try to understand what you're saying. You're saying that a raid quest to unlock a server progression isn't good. I think it's awesome. What is even tedious? Wait, what is even tedious about the AQ Scepter grind outside of grinding the bugs at the very beginning? It's supposed to be a guild effort for that too. It takes literally like 12 hours of a guild doing it. Bro, I don't know what world you live on, what world you live in that like you think that that's filler content. That's crazy. Not talking about the whole entirety of the quest line. So you're saying that you should get the quest for no effort. Are you saying that the tediousness is the rep grind at the beginning? Because it's supposed to be tedious. The whole point is that it's supposed to be an arduous journey. You have to gain the trust of people, this faction of dragons that you've never interacted with. So you should just magically become the hero? Does that make sense in any world? No, it's supposed to be tedious. You're supposed to earn the quest. That's why classic World of Warcraft is good, because you don't just get everything you want. If that was the case, everybody would have Scareblord, guys. What would it be? It would be meaningless. It wouldn't matter. But my whole point before that like rabbit hole is, I think that classic MMOs have a place because of their design philosophy and the way that they were made. I'm a little bit concerned about the idea of a modern development team kind of stepping in and taking away the reasons why the world feels good to engage in. Modern devs literally don't know how to world build. Look at SOD. All the new content was instance, remember incursions. New content needed instances because they were not going to add world. Right, so the reason why SOD was super weird, okay, listen to this. So Season of Discovery was on the same client as Classic Era and Anniversary servers and Hardcore, right? It's the same world in the files. So what ended up happening is they made things, but they were limited in what they could and couldn't make. They could not make new zones. They could not make additional pieces of land because that would carry over, but they could place doodads, right? So this is why you see instant stuff in SOD. In many ways, they were very limited in what they could and couldn't do. And I remember meeting with them, I think it was at BlizzCon. They basically couldn't make a new zone because then it would carry over to Classic and it would be just an empty new zone in the world. And I think if there was a Classic Plus, they could fully commit to it being a different world. And they can go crazy on that kind of stuff. But with SOD, I think that they were kind of forced into that instanced content, and that's why you saw things like all the content being added as more of like spawns. Where like, you know, Ashenvale event spawns in. You know, incursions are through a portal that's already pre-existing. I love SOD. I didn't. I did not love SOD. I feel like SOD fundamentally took a different approach. There was the approach, right? If you think about Classic and Classic Plus, Season of Discovery took the approach of modernizing an old game, and I think it was the wrong way for me. Everything was flashy, every class was tried to be balanced, everything was instant cast, everybody had like a ton of everything. And in the end, right, what ended up happening? Well, you still have a meta, you still have strong classes and weak classes. That's not changed from Classic. Balance was like, you know, whatever. PvP is in shambles, by the way. SOD PvP is terrible. It was completely like removed from the game, I feel like. Because of how much they balanced PvE. Like they tried to make PvE balanced, and in that sense, they completely destroyed the other side of the game. And I think if you were a kind of person that just wanted to raid in Season of Discovery, probably had a blast. I feel like it ruined the whole product, and I didn't like that. Now, that's not to say that everything they made in SOD was bad. I just think that overall, the approach was something that I think was from a side of development that I would have reversed. SOD was fun in a way that it was still classic-y, but with changing metas. Yeah, I mean, it was like... The way I would describe it would be like a Frankenstein Cataclysm in the classic world. But PvP is terrible. To me, I would have rather just played Cataclysm than SOD. I think that's why Phase 1 felt so good. We hadn't gone far enough in the world for things to truly change. I feel like the early phases were good though, because so much was still rooted in what we knew as the old game. If you think about like a, you know, a classic WoW here, and then like Phase 1 SOD, there's like this much overlap, right? This is like, or no, like it's not like this. It's like this, right? Where like this is like things that were changed from classic to like SOD. There's like a huge overlap between them, right? But then as you go on into the phases, the purple gets further and further from this red circle. So you have like Phase 1, and then Phase 2 here is like this, right? And then, you know, there's less and less overlap with what you know. And so like, it just gets further and further because everything changes so much. All of a sudden, hunters are like instant cast, like Pum Pyro mages with instant CC across the board, you know, like... I also think that level gating phases doesn't work when you gate the world as well. Like if you think about Classic Beta as an example of what they did. Classic Beta was like a pseudo level gated, not world gated content. And I think they were trying to replicate Classic Beta in some way, but they missed. Because what you could do in Classic Beta is you could level to 30. That was the cap. The level cap was 30. But there was no profession cap. You're not hard locked at 150. You could go to 225. And if you're a gnome, you could go to 240, and you can get very high level trinkets that you could raid group like level 50 mobs. You know, like it was really cool because the meta, you could do anything, right, in the world. You just were only level 30. And I think with SOD, what they did is they said, okay, we're going to do the same thing. Level 25 is the cap. But what they did is they cut professions. They said, okay, level 25, but you can only go to 150 professions. So they cut that out. And then they basically made the rest of the world not drop relevant items. So you couldn't like pre-farm a bunch of stuff. You could pre-farm like Gold Thorn. But like they went out of their way. They went out of their way to nerf things like that. Like Furbog, right? They nerfed it. You couldn't do it. And then they did things like Righteous Orbs. Nope, you can't do that anymore. Right? 5-man, they closed the 5-mans. Yeah, they went out of their way to reduce the world and segment it. And so what ended up happening was they had this idea of let's make it like Classic Beta. But what ended up happening is they created a fragmented World of Warcraft experience where you're not getting Azeroth. You're getting Azeroth Part 1. And then in Phase 2, you're getting Azeroth Part 2. So it completely destroyed the world from my perspective. Because you're living in these little bubbles. And then you're moving to a different bubble in the world. And it wasn't a complete game experience at all. Must have been limited by team size and Blizzard. No, it wasn't. That's not what happened. They didn't want people doing that. They wanted Season of Discovery to be FOMO free, if you will. Not super sweaty. And I think the problem is, in trying to do that, in trying to like curate an experience for their players and limit the players, they ended up reducing the product as a whole. So like they basically curated a lesser experience such that you couldn't get an advantage over other people as much. And I think that is not good design for something like an MMO, where you're supposed to be able to put time in and get a lead over people that don't have as much time. If you played SOD, you were probably a little sweaty. Yeah, I mean, SOD was... So there's so many things I think that they learned from SOD. 3-day lockouts are not good for the game. More raiding is not good, because it increased the demand on the players to the point that like it was ridiculous raiding all the time. Something I'm worried about is, do you think, how will they be able to address the problem with eye level and gear and strength below in Classic Plus after releasing new content? Like, what is Classic Plus content? Really, what is Classic Plus content? And I think the answer isn't just raid. It's not, oh, well, Classic Plus means more raids, right? So if you think about it, Classic Plus could be a raid instance between MC and BWL. Why couldn't it? Why does Classic Plus have to be after Nax, right? So if they add stuff, they could add something that's meaningfully impactful from a dungeon in the same way that you run MC for all of the phases. They could have another raid that has like a DFT style item in it, where like you're running it for that kind of item, even after the fact, right? And I think that there's a very real possibility, and I think, right, it could be as simple as more engagement with the world being Classic Plus, Moons and WoW, right? Something like that, right? It doesn't, like, you know, it could improve the transition from dungeons being a lot of fun into like kind of raid loggy. There could be some form of more like dungeon kind of harder dungeon kind of thing. Think like in Wrath of the Lich King or TBC, when they release these raids alongside a dungeon, like like Magister's Terrace. Like Heroic Magister's Terrace, they could just add like a hard 5-man dungeon that's after Ubers. You know, that could increase Classic, you know, that could be part of Classic Plus. So I don't think that, like, as much as I do agree that there is a problem with gearing after Nax, there really isn't that much of an issue before Nax. How does this work, guys? You go from like level 60, right? And you start clearing dungeons and you're this powerful. And you get MC gear and you're this powerful. It's actually not that much. BWL gear here. AQ is a big jump, actually, for a lot of classes. And then Nax is a huge jump. So I think that there's a possibility of releasing something between these two, where like in between BWL and AQ, you have some form of new content to bridge this gap of like power spike. Same thing here between AQ and Nax. I think there's actually a very well developed early game of Oni. You have like Oni plus MC and BWL, and it's all pretty thematic, all in Blackrock Mountain, and you know, it's very like dragony and fiery, and so I think this trio is actually really good. I feel like AQ and Nax needs a similar trio, and so there could be some form of expansion on, like, you know, what is this phase? What is phase 5? What is phase 6? You know, I think that's... Does MC gear get obliterated with Nax gear? So if you think about it on an overall scale, yes. But what Classic does really well is, like, let's say this is MC Oni, or Oni MC BWL, right? You're getting a QSR, Band of Acuria, Thunder Fury, OSG, etc, etc, etc. These are items that are BIS going into Nax. Same thing from BWL, DFT. Some of these items are never replaced. Rejuve, MQG, even goes into TBC, a tier, right? Like all of these items. So what ends up happening is you have these lists of really good items. Same thing from AQ, like Cthulhu gear mostly. These items are like, basically, when you're in phase 6, you're still gonna run AQ for Cthulhu loot. You're still gonna run BWL for these items. And you may still run, you might not need it anymore because it's been, let's say, 14 months. Maybe you have all of this gear by now. But you may also want to be doing this for a Thunder Fury. Maybe a QSR. Right? So the gearing in Classic is very much not vertical in the sense that you replace and re-gear every phase, but it's additive in the content you're doing. So like, it's not completely invalidated, but you get a sense of moving past it. What happens 2 raids after Nax? What do you mean? After you've cleared Nax 2 times? Well, the way that Nax gear works is you have 40 people in the raid. It takes 2 tiers after Nax. Nax is the final tier. You can't go past Nax really without breaking the game. Because in Nax gear, you have like, you don't have haste in a Classic Plus. I think a Classic Plus has to reset some way, right? So like, this can't really happen. You can't really go up much more. You could go up a little bit. You know, you could go up a little bit. You could add things, right? Like, so this is where it gets interesting. Classic doesn't have things, notably expertise, haste, and then there's gaps. There's gaps in gear still in Nax. I would say like hunter pants. So there's some things where like you'll use old gear. Maybe you're still using a DFT. So you could have something that comes out and it's actually the same power level as Nax gear with alternate stats. Like maybe you add an expertise item. Maybe you add some haste proc. And these would be really cool items to get that wouldn't necessarily break the game. Or you add new stats. Like you could literally add haste into the game. There's no reason you can't. In a Classic Plus, haste is a really cool stat. And it would make casters better. One of the biggest problems casters have right now is they don't have as much scalability. They only have spell power. It's like if, and I guess crit, right? You could add armor pen. Yeah, you could add armor pen. You could add, yeah, ARP. You're right. Like there's a lot of things that you could have in a Classic Plus world. You could have alternate tier sets, right? The dude like a DPS warrior. This is a gap, right? DPS warrior set. DPS set alternatives for like tier 3. And you could call it tier 3.5, right? Something like this. You know, I don't know, right? But basically you could have like a Dreadnought alternative set. So yeah, you could have PvP gear. You could have trinkets, new trinkets. There's so many things, right? Like 3A, 3B, yeah, pretty much. So like there's things that you could add that is this level of power infinitely. You could just keep going at this power level. And you could go up a tiny bit, right? Like with every patch, you could go up like this. You could go, you know, up like this and just make it like 2% upgrade over tier 3 kind of thing. Like not a huge upgrade. People love upgrades, especially if they look cool. So you could just go kind of like this and not really break the game. And then go with things like maybe proc items or like cool effects or whatever. There's so much Classic Plus you could do. It isn't necessarily just making items have 10% more agility on it, because that's going to break the game. What I think they need to do though is mostly just develop very little things. Like they start, before we get to that raid, I think some classes should be touched a little bit. I think casters should be brought in line a little bit with melee. And I think the way that you would do that is by altering world buff effects. They disproportionately impact melee on top of them already being stronger. Like for example, melee get like 500 attack power from world buffs, and they get like 15% crit. Casters get 20% crit but 0 spell power. If casters got spell power from Oni buff as well, or spell power from DMT as well, they would be much better than they are now. Should Classic Plus have SOD style world buffs? I'm gonna say something. I don't think world buffs should exist in Classic Plus. World buffs don't exist in TBC, and it's fine. World buffs don't exist in Wrath, and it's fine. People shouldn't be playing the game for world buffs. Honestly, they just shouldn't. You don't need them. Why are we giving buffs? Yeah, it's fun. It's cool, but it breaks raids entirely. So you can only have one thing. World buffs or good raiding content. Pick one. Now, I think world buffs, I kind of like what Sandan is saying. I think world buffs could be an interesting concept to give to farm raids. Because it's instead of nerfing the content to make it easier, you're buffing the players to make them like have more damage or whatever. And I think you can do that in a way that isn't with world buffs though. You can do that in a way like in ICC, how you get a damage buff after however many weeks, and it slowly ramps up, right? So I think that there's some... You could do something like that. The zone just gives it. Right, exactly. Then you don't have to worry about getting buffs or, you know, buying them or whatever. So I think world buffs should go away, honestly. I think it's terrible for the raiding environment. I really do. People have fun with world buffs, but I think I have felt it a lot with the Frontier no world buff. It is so unbelievably nice to have no baggage going into the raid. There's no, oh, I forgot my world buffs. Oh, I forgot my DMF. I forgot my whatever the right? You should still be able to get world buffs in Blast Dungeons, but like, it's miserable, man. It really is. I'm so happy without world buffs that it's like crazy. Removing the 30 consumes next? Yes. I think so. I think it should go. Look. I don't think that you should be able to pop strength, AP. I think it should be battle and guardian. That's what I was about to say. I don't think you should be able to pop strength, AP, agility, crit, armor, health, regen, spell power, food buff, second food buff, your other spell power consume, your oils, your weapon stones, your like, it's too much, man. It's too much. But then now it kind of becomes boring. But the thing is, the game isn't a raiding simulator. And Classic Plus shouldn't be treated as a raiding simulator, and it shouldn't be developed as a raiding simulator. You should be able to enjoy raiding on it, but if you're playing the game just to raid once a week, that's not how it should be developed. Like, that may be a game that you could play, but like, that's not how it should be, in my opinion. Unless you're a high tier guild, getting 40 players together is a pain in the ass. My guild, even right now, ends up with at least one empty slot. You know what? Good. Yeah. It's supposed to be a pain in the ass. The whole point of 40-man raids is to create social friction. It's supposed to make a whole raid, a guild come together and go kill these bosses. When you have 20-man raids, the guild can be much smaller and you can be in your little small bubble, and you can cut out interaction, and then you go to 10-man raid, you cut out more interaction, and all of a sudden you don't need a guild anymore. And so it's a dangerous line of thinking to reduce raid sizing, I think. And that's why in Classic you have much larger guilds and structured community content than you do in Wrath and TBC. Why do you think that is? Well, it's raid size. I just feel like raid logging is much easier if you only need 2 consumes, no world buffs. I think that that's a good thing. Okay, if you don't want to play a game to the point that you're raid logging, should you be forced to log in and do your chores every day so that you can raid? No. Why should you? Don't make people, if people don't want to log in to go farm 1,000 gold a raid, they shouldn't have to. They should just be able to raid. I agree that a 40-man raid builds connections in the guild, but when you have 250 guilds, yeah. But I would say having a guild in Classic is an iconic experience, and it's not like that outside of Classic. And I can tell you with like very confidently that the guild experience you get in classic World of Warcraft is much different than in any other version of the game. And the reason is because you have to work together on a much larger scale. And it's much harder to get people to stick around. And it's harder to get people to commit to your guild. But the whole point is that experience. And so I think if you take away 40-man raids, it undermines the classic connections that you would otherwise make. I don't agree. Mythic raiding on retail requires much more organization and teamwork. Okay. But that's not what I'm talking about. A mythic raid may require more skill and it requires more coordination and more teamwork, but a classic guild is online much more often, and it's much more. It's a different thing, and I would agree that a retail guild is working together, and they're probably way better and organized on average, but like, it's completely different to classic. I just wish raiding didn't feel like it required a time investment of a second 9 to 5. I know I said stuff earlier today about how I think people should be able to raid log if they want to, but I don't want them to remove the barrier to entry that raiding has. I think it's important to maintain some level of barrier to entry in terms of time investment to be a raider. In the same way that, like, if you were a raider in 2005, you were a raider. I think that having something to invest in like that is very important. So I don't want them to just remove world buffs and remove, let's say, like, consume stacking, and then not replace some sort of investment loop with something else, like that investment loop with something else. I agree. I don't think it should be as expensive as it is to raid. And that's what I've said. That's why I think that consume stacking should be removed. As a warrior, you should not be able to pop chili and have it scale with spell power. So, number one, things that I think that they should remove from classic, very specifically, buff stacking. You should only be able to have a guardian elixir for armor, battle elixir, just like in TBC, and then this would be either strength or agi, or a flask, right? You obviously know you'd take counts as both. This is how it should be. And then you should only be able to use this food, the Valentine's Day food and the midsummer food, while the event is going. This would make it massively convenient for all raiders, and everybody would be on the same playing field, and then nobody would be like farming as much. And you know what they should do though? I think that if they're gonna do this, I think that they should maybe think about adding a mini haste pot / destruction pot. Because I think that there should be some aggressive thing for non-warriors. If you can't consume, if you're only required to do this, maybe have this, right? I think that would be fun. What's going on with Classic Plus? Any leaks? No. Nothing yet. Nothing yet, bro.